अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाजरीन, आप देख रहे हैं नसीम ज़हरा एट 8। आज नाजरीन एक ख़ास प्रोग्राम आपकी खिदमत में लेके आए हैं। दुनिया जहान में हम बात करें इंसानी हकूक़ की, और हमारे मुल्क के हवाले से भी बहुत बात होती है इंसानी हकूक़ की। ख़ित्ते में आपको मालूम है, एक तरफ अफ़गानिस्तान है, उधर क्या हालात हैं, दूसरी तरफ हिंदुस्तान है, उधर क्या हालात हैं। कश्मीर में बर्मा अपनी जगह है, यूक्रेन के मामलात अलग हैं, हिजाब का मामला अलग है, तो बहुत सी चीज़ें हैं। और आपको मालूम है नाज़रीन, यूरोपियन यूनियन जो है, यूरोपियन यूनियन में एक ख़ास स्पेशल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव हैं फॉर ह्यूमन राइट्स, जो आजकल पाकिस्तान आए हुए हैं। इनकी बड़ी दिलचस्प बैकग्राउंड है। ये ट्रेड यूनियनिस्ट थे, उसके बाद इन्होंने लॉ भी पढ़ाया यूनिवर्सिटी में, फिर ये फॉरेन मिनिस्टर भी रहे हैं, फिर ये आयरलैंड के, फिर ये डेप्यूटी प्राइम मिनिस्टर भी रहे हैं, और कोलंबिया में वहाँ का एक कॉन्फ्लिक्ट था, उसमें इन्होंने जाके सालसी का भी रोल अदा किया। तो बड़ी इनकी दिलचस्प बैकग्राउंड है। तो हम इनसे पूछेंगे कि ये हमारे ख़ित्ते के हवाले से चीज़ों को किस तरीके से देखते हैं, और यकीनन वो तमाम सवालात जो आपके जहन में उनसे पूछेंगे। Very warm welcome to the show, Special Representative Eamon Gilmore.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
So let's start from what brings you to Pakistan?
I'm in Pakistan to have meetings with the government, with civil society, with the diplomatic service, to talk about the human rights situation in Pakistan, and also to talk about the European Union's own action plan and the work that the European Union is doing internally and externally on human rights. The background is the GSP plus trade preferences that Pakistan enjoys with the European Union, which gives lower tariffs and tariff-free access to the European Union market. And we're changing the way in which that is going to operate from the end of 2023. So my visit is just ahead of a monitoring mission which will take place later in March on those trade preferences, because they are conditional on Pakistan adopting and implementing 27 different human rights conventions.
Which it has been doing since this GSP Plus program started, right?
Precisely. That is the whole idea, is that the European Union gives not just to Pakistan, but indeed to many countries, access to the European market on a tariff-free basis. Pakistan is one of the biggest beneficiaries of that arrangement, particularly in the textile sector. The arrangement for access to the European market is on condition that the country complies with certain human rights standards, and in return for that, the European Union provides tariff-free access to the markets.
So you would not only be responsible for the GSP Plus and human rights, interdependence and the connection right there, but I imagine that you're responsible for human rights generally, and how the EU looks at the issue of human rights globally. Is that correct?
My role is to promote the European Union's policy on human rights in the rest of the world. And my job, my specific job, is to talk with governments, to talk with multilateral organisations, to talk with civil society. I'm not the totality of what the European Union does on human rights, but I make a contribution.
You make a contribution, and every contribution makes a difference, right? So, so what you will discuss with the government of Pakistan, we will let that be, because I'm sure we'll hear more about it as you carry on with your meetings. So if I may take this opportunity with you in Pakistan and with us in Pakistan looking at the human rights situation in our region, let's ask you some questions. For example, let's talk about Afghanistan. Afghanistan, with the Taliban there, it's a government that's not recognized, but certainly issues of starvation, issues of drought, issues of scarcity of food and medicine. What would you do to alleviate that within the EU? I mean, you as an individual, what would your role be?
Well, let me tell you what we are already doing, because, as you said, we don't recognize the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan, and we have set down certain criteria for engagement with the Taliban. The immediate priority is the humanitarian situation, the situation of people who don't have food, who don't have access to medicines and medical care, and in many cases who don't have access to shelter in wintertime. So immediately the European Union became involved. We put our humanitarian people on the ground in Afghanistan. We have a programme of about €1 billion, which is a large sum of money, to provide humanitarian aid to the people of Afghanistan. We have already committed about €550 million of that, providing food, providing medical assistance, and providing shelter for the people in Afghanistan. Secondly, we are concerned about the human rights situation in the country, and in particular the situation as it affects women and girls. We have already led at the Human Rights Council a resolution on Afghanistan, which will provide for the appointment of a special rapporteur by the United Nations to examine the situation of human rights in the country. That special rapporteur is due to be appointed at the end of this Human Rights Council session, probably towards the end of March. And what we will be encouraging will be that that rapporteur is given support, is given access, and is given cooperation by the authorities in the country.
To look after to
look at the human rights. We're already receiving, and particularly
Understand.
through civil society organisations, many disturbing reports. And what we want to do is to see what is happening on the ground. And indeed the issue, may I say, that the issue of Afghanistan is also on my agenda in my discussions.
I was just thinking, taking an opportunity, given your own experience, and it was intriguing and shocking for a lot of us in terms of Aung San Suu Kyi's approach, but let's now switch to Kashmir in terms of what is happening. So what steps has the EU taken? If we look at Afghanistan, and it's a bad situation, and I mean obviously Taliban's evolution, we all know, that's something, despite that, we will put them to, we will call out the Taliban on human rights. What about the Indian government's unending atrocities against the Kashmiris? What is the European Union doing? What have you done as an individual on that?
Well, first of all, we have called on both India and on Pakistan to engage bilaterally on what needs to be done in Kashmir, and to involve the Kashmiri population and the Kashmiri people in that process. Secondly, on the issue of human rights violations, no matter where they occur, have to be investigated and reported on. There are UN special procedures for the investigation of human rights violations, and we would call on both India and Pakistan to admit the UN special procedures, to look at the situation in Kashmir, and to report on it.
Mr. Gilmore, in Pakistan, you have the UNCIP, you have UN rapporteurs, they're repeatedly invited. I wasn't asking about the UN, and I think to draw a kind of putting the two together, Pakistan and India, when I'm talking about Jammu and Kashmir, Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where the world over it is recognized that the kind of atrocities that are continuing, you can't be putting Pakistan and India together. I mean, there's no similarity there. And surely somebody who is so committed to human rights, you would know that. And the latest report of the International Crisis Group has laid out in clear terms. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, several EU rapporteurs wrote a letter, or was it to you or to a higher authority at the EU, to say that the condition in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir is brutal. There is no other word. There is the end of the special status of Kashmir. It is the Jammu and Kashmir state, which is under the UN resolutions, is a disputed territory. And forget about disputed territory, much more about what's happening to the people of Kashmir. So I'm a little surprised, if I may, at your response of saying that you've talked to Pakistan and India. Where does Pakistan come into the picture of 700,000 Indian troops occupying the Kashmir is...
Well, there is the issue does need to be addressed by both countries, and we have consistently said that is the case. In relation to abuses of human rights, we have repeatedly called for the observance of human rights and the compliance with human rights in Kashmir as we do elsewhere. We have discussed the issue with the Indian authorities. I've discussed the issue with the Indian ambassador in Brussels. We've had many engagements about it, and we're being absolutely consistent. As far as the European Union is concerned, human rights have to be observed everywhere. There are no exceptions. There are no exemptions. And we discuss it consistently and even-handedly with every country.
So, for example, the Citizenship Act in India, which was passed, which was clearly, as the Indian media and Indian politicians, some of them reportedly said, consistently said, was against the Muslims. In terms of this whole hijab controversy, do you support the fact that they would say a woman can't wear a hijab in the university? Would you? What is your position?
I think a woman should be able to wear whatever she wants in a university or anywhere else.
So, when India, the Indian state, BJP, which is, their own critics are writing about it, that it is a Hindu fascist state. These are not my words. If you pick up independent reports on India, this is what they're saying. So, there is no penalty on India as there would be penalty on the Taliban. There would be no penalty on the Indian state with this kind of human rights atrocious record getting worse, where the Indians themselves are saying that this is death of our secularism, this is the death of our identity, this is the death of Gandhian India.
Well, the European Union, as I've said, we have a dialogue with every country in the world about human rights. It's part of our foreign policy. It's an integral part of our foreign policy. We discuss human rights with every country. They're the same human rights that we discuss with every country. There is no separate human rights that we discuss with one country and then with another country. Human rights, as far as we're concerned, are universal and they're indivisible.
Conditions are different.
We have a human rights dialogue with India, as we have with many other countries around the world. We have a human rights engagement with Pakistan, as we have with many other countries around the world. And we maintain a consistent position on all human rights, irrespective of which country that we're talking about.
So you're here as a special human rights rapporteur on EU's special rapporteur on human rights, and I personally thought this would be a great opportunity because we don't go to Brussels often, we don't get a chance to access individuals like yourselves. Because human rights is a very major issue. What the human rights issue within my country, I know about, and we are very critical about the issues that are there, and as you know, our civil society is very active, and we take up these issues. So I wasn't looking to you to, in terms of human rights in Pakistan that we are aware of. But I was really looking towards you to get a better understanding of where the EU stands, beyond Afghanistan or just beyond Pakistan.
And as I have shown, I'm very happy to engage with you on that and to answer any questions that you have. I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to talk about the human rights situation anywhere in the world, including, by the way, in the European Union itself, because no country has a perfect human rights record.
Indeed.
We all have issues to address, and I think that the best way to do it is by addressing them honestly and without some hidden political agenda. We adopted just over a year ago an action plan on human rights and democracy in the world for the next 5 years. It was agreed unanimously by all of the 27 member states of the European Union, and in the 140 countries throughout the world where the European Union is represented, we're implementing and giving effect to that action plan. And it's the same action plan, and it's the same human rights policy that we promote everywhere in the world. As you've said, the situations and the circumstances differ from country to country and from region to region, and we engage separately with each country about the situation in the country, and we work particularly closely with the United Nations system, which through the Human Rights Council, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we work very closely with her office to promote and defend human rights around the world, because they belong to people, and they belong to people everywhere.
Absolutely. And who better than yourself, with your quite a remarkable background, to be leading this effort within the EU. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much indeed. A real pleasure to do an interview with you.
नाज़रीन, इसी पर हम ख़त्म करते हैं, और उम्मीद है कि आपने भी सुना होगा दिलचस्पी से। बड़ी खुल के इनसे बात हुई और बड़ी खुल के इन्होंने जवाबात दिए। हमें इजाज़त दीजिएगा। खुदा हाफिज़। पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद।